GM. Here we are again. We are going to talk about the most powerful concept in Move and Sui, like resources, object, ownership, modules, function. At the end, we will make token model where we will utilize all the things what we have learned. And this is what makes Move or Sui so different from any other chain or language. So let's move ahead and get on the screen. Let's start with object. What are objects in Sui? On Sui, everything is an object. Let me explain you with the code. So let's write module playground, move playground. Let's write a move playground colon and let's say objects demo. So we define a struct called myObject with the hash key ability. So let's write the struct, say myObject and has key. Let's give it an ID, is UID. Let's write a public so that error will not come. Yeah. So this is mandatory. Every objects in Sui must have a unique ID so the blockchain can track it. Now let's give it a value which is U64. Just a normal data field. Object must always start with the UID field. That's what separate an object from a plain resources. And if I give you example of plain resources, exactly same but without ID. So objects are basically wrapper around resources with the metadata like ownership. This can be owned by a single account, shared, used by multiple accounts, immutable, which cannot change once created. Notice how we have used UID here. That's what make it an object in Sui. Now let's see ownership. Why ownership? Because ownership prevents duplication. If you own a token, only you can use it. When you transfer it, the ownership moves and you no longer control it. Let's see on the syntax level how you define that function. So let's change here from objects demo to ownership demo. Now let's transfer the ownership of my object to another recipient address. So let's write a public function. Now let's say send object. Let's pass in the argument object recipient. Now let's write a transfer method transfer. Now let's give it a type which is my object, which is my struct my object. Then recipient data type would be address. Transfer would be transfer. Then let's pass the object and recipient. The recipient. So here we call a transfer transfer. The object is moved to the recipient. The sender cannot access it anymore. As we have spoke about resources and objects, let's take it one step further and talk about modules and function, the building blocks of writing smart contract in Move. What are modules? Module is like a container. It holds all the struct, function that define your logic. Think of it as the folder in your code base. It keeps related things together and makes the program easy to understand. This is a perfect example. We created a module called ownership demo. Inside it, we have a struct, my object, and a function, send object. Now let's come to functions. What are functions? Functions are the entry point where your on-chain business logic lives. For example, creating a token, transferring it, or updating some state. In Move, functions define what your smart contract can actually do. We have seen a lot of function visibility. Now this is important. Function in Move have visibility modifier that control who can call them. For example, we have C public here, which means can be called by any other modules. Suppose we have in sources, we have other contract that in that contract, in that module would be able to call this function as it is a public. Now, if you don't put anything, which means by default that function will be private, only callable inside the same module. Outside this contract cannot be callable. And there is another visibility which is entry. Now this means callable from transaction. User can trigger them. So whenever you want a user to directly interact with your contract, make it as entry. Now let's bring all this knowledge together with a practical example. Let's build a token module. Let's remove all this part and say my token. Now let's write a struct which is token and has key ability. Let's have a ID which is UID, then balance. I will have two fields. First is ID and second is balance, which is U64. Now let's give it a public. Yeah. So let's write entry function to create a new token. So entry function which is main, and in the argument we'll pass two things, which is recipient and amount. The recipient would be address and then my amount would be U64. Now I want you to try this, take it as a challenge. Make an instance of this token and put ID and balance, and in the balance would be the amount. Now let's take another function which is public function, and let's make this function to get balance. And then let's pass a token, and this would be the reference of the token, and the return type would be U64. Now this would return token balance. So the token dot balance. Yeah, so we did a token struct with an ID and balance meant as an entry function that let users create token and send them to the recipient, and get balance is the public function, so other module can check balances. So now let's quickly summarize it. What we have seen till now, we have seen objects, codes to data structure wrapping resources and ownership. Resources enforce scarcity and no duplications. Ownership ensures only one account control an object. Transfer, safe way of moving one ownership to another between accounts. Modules, containers for core. Functions define the core logic. Visibility like public, private, entry functions and all. In the next video, we will see security consideration like gas optimization, re-entrance prevention, formal verification, and few more things. And yeah, see you in the next one.